Television. A man, his mind. One guy says he's sick of reruns. Those who want to publicly tell why we were put on this planet have themselves only recently arrived. After a careful study of all the great books of the world, one man wrote up a list of all the important subjects the books covered, then used this list to wipe his ass. A knight's secret strategy. If you're going out to kill a dragon, kill two at a time. I saw Jig, I saw Saul. The simpler parts of a puzzle are inclined to explain their position by noting the limitations imposed upon them by the position of the surrounding pieces. Show and tell can go to hell. All right. Today's economic report. Man is the only creature cursed whose curse is forced, self-inflicted. Do you know what this means? If you do, of course, you're freed from the curse. Hog prices up, hog prices down. Common stocks slip, common stocks hold. Today's health news. Knowing the secret is the only neonatal illness fatal that is not contagious. Bite 2 bullets before going to bed and call me in the morning if the caliber of your pain seems to still warrant it. In city math, 2 plus 2 should always come out the same, somehow. The two brothers were asked, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And the first one replied, "Rich and famous." And the second one said, "Rich and rich." Telling an ordinary active man what he could do that would be better for him is like trying to get him to change what turns him on sexually. It was a test to see who would react. No, it wasn't. Well, if it was a test too crude to even note. So consider I withdrew my note. No matter the castle, it should be quiet in a knight's room. The man did all that was necessary to attract a crowd, and once a sizable one was assembled, he addressed them thusly. Life has had me call you here today to tell you that it has nothing more to say. And is so common under such circumstances, some were pleased with the message and some were not. And a great many were just happy that they hadn't had to pay to get in. Once a dumbing entertainment reaches a certain level of public popularity, ticket prices go up. History has not had to learn this lesson, since this is what history is. And now a sales pitch from our sponsor, Enlightenment. One thing you can definitely say about the experience is that it always gives the desired result. A survey. Near nude love those of the forest to strut, while those of the city fashion pursue. Out with their tongue go the simple, trial by the fist for the growing, while Gordian questions the children still love. In manland, all is well. There are 2 ways operational you can consider it. Either that all great ideas are equally meaningful in reverse, or that a more alert man is capable of bi-sequential perception. Of note, the fact that the vision of the more conscious is omnidirectional. A man told his son, "You must realize when absolutes are pertinent and when they are not. If Istanbul is the object, then you are only in the city once you have absolutely crossed the bridge and arrived therein. But you might note that, outside the destination, wherever you are now, it's a long, long way from here to there." At that instant, the lad gained an entirely new appreciation of the beauty and purpose of spheres. Actors say it's not in the writing, but in the presentation. And authors say that it's all right there in the words. What do you say? Note to outbound knights. There are at least 2 ways to go about it. You can either starve a dragon to death or feed it till it bursts. Follow-up question. How can you correctly identify a real foe from a faux foe? By the amount of noise it makes. One father attempts to explain the intricacies of city logic. The crude, the simple, the savage, and untalented are less likely to be hypocritical. It does not seem like this should be so, and I do not know why it is so, but there you are. That's urban existence for you. Life. That structure beyond all criticism, whose existence to man's mind on criticism seems to depend. Okay, fair is fair. The logic of this kind of stuff. There is the going and there is the arriving. But it's mostly a matter of going. The mind has a tongue of its own, and an alert man should have attached to his a sign. Warning, overuse of this facility can be detrimental to your desire. One man's definition of relationships: stewing in yours and someone else's juices. Another test. Hey, don't ever take a test unless they tell you what the prize is, all right? So you're safe. A reminder. All the civilized have a city in their head. Second reminder. All the less civilized have a jungle in their pants. And oh yeah, so do the civilized. Third reminder. By now, everyone has at least a part of a city in their head. The warrior who is reticent toward the external world is one thing, but he who is so toward himself, well, he's one thing multiplied by about 10,000 other things. A man demands, since the mind can make you sick, how come it can't make you well? And while this is a commonly held attitude, ask yourself, just who ever told you that it couldn't? The simple like to imagine that they are dangerous. Oh, they are. But they like to imagine in ways more refined and civilized. All staring is comment. To his pleasant surprise, while thumbing through a book, Curios of the Middle Ages, one man found an engraving of himself. No pain is truly human pain until it is put in words. Efforts true, efforts misdirected. To blindly peel all of the layers from an onion in search of the onion will ultimately leave one with naught. As he sat one day, a man so pondered, it is only pseudo-lovers who assure that they will never lie to one another. For what would real ones ever have to lie about? He further reflected on whether he was thinking only about physical love in lovers or even anything external at all. Theatrics. Don't overdo it. One guy's motto, spill your guts now or spill your guts later. Oh, did I mention he lives in the city? Okay, this kind of stuff defined one more time. Real adult humor. Men love dreams because that's one time they know for sure their mind's totally out of control. By legend, certain neural knights cherish their dream time based on the fact that it is the one instant from which they are relatively certain to awaken. There is another reason included in this, but it has to do with effort and not expectation. The neural dynamics of bondage. Once you've commented, you're committed. As life hired the new mechanic to work at its local conditions garage, it told him, you can either wear your nails in some fashionable manner or file them for efficiency. There is only one form of criticism: useless. It's not what a neural death warrior might think about that can give away his position and prove fatal, but that he think anything about where he might happen to be. One man said, I'm not talking to you, and I'll leave it to you to figure out who he was talking to. Cruising around the city. On really nice days, this one guy let his top down, and he didn't even own a car. There is dumbing entertainment and supportive entertainment. But where is the encouraging, the impelling? Those who, to prove their point and say, the historical evidence is right before your eyes, confess they've not read the real evidence that's within them. For his big birthday, one guy thought, now what can I give myself? I know, I'll be quiet. Since the mind's incomparable, men compare it to everything under the sun. While talking to some of his thoughts, a man mentioned, those who give no reason for what they do may have the best reasons. Some off-the-road reasoning you'll never hear in city driver's ed. A man who can control himself has no desire to control others. Any comment made can turn nasty, while no silence can. The plottings, the passage. One neural sailor made his way via navigational explosions. A warrior's son asked him, can you actually stop thought? You can put it on constant temporary hold. After all, once understood, what is enlightenment but consciousness without the commentary? That's right, Miss Me. Hold all my calls. Last time we were talking about certain kinds of apparent methods of doing something with the mind. Focusing thought, stopping thought, slowing down the internal commentary, you recall. And I had brought out a particular example that I mentioned that I'm sure most of you know, that there was a man from the Middle East in this century who came west into Europe and the United States and had a method that he called self-remembering. And I mentioned that people took it as being something new, and somewhere along the way I mentioned that it was really not new, but there is something of other useful significance beyond the example that I wanted to back up that has to do not with somebody out there and not with some method that does not turn into almost a dogma, but in here. Everyone's heard the old Saul adage, epithet, conventional wisdom that there's nothing new under the sun, and I can't think what it is now, but I'm sure there's one just the opposite. There is. All right, there is. When it gets to, now civilization, recall I gave you one about that only, there's a legend from another people. I'm not sure anyone got the significance of that. Albeit me doing it twice, that there was a legend of one people's that said, only those hoop snakes roll and thrive the side of whose own ass they find repellent. So if you think about it, I was assuming that you're colloquial enough to know that there has been parts of Europe back in the Middle Ages, and now I guess the last stronghold is that great domain of intellectual forthrightness, the deep south in the United States, that has stories that there's certain snakes called hoop snakes. And since snakes do not have little feet and are limited to the kind of speed at which they can move, a hoop snake, being the devilish creature that it is, will grab its own tail if it doesn't like you and begin to roll in a hoop. And suppose they can run as fast as a horse. If a hoop snake, if you make a hoop snake bad, it'll grab its own tail and roll, and don't say, well, hey, a snake's chasing me. Anybody can outrun a snake. A one-legged man with palsy, not a hoop snake. But now think about it. So think about that symbolically. Think about that symbolically now, the hoop snake representing some great evil force, something that's beyond the natural. That is, a snake's natural, but not has some supernatural ability. And I was going to suggest, amongst other representations that I could pull out of that, would be you could look at it as being civilization again, the ultimate legalized form of cannibalism, and this is just another picturization of it. What would make that snake move? That the only way it can move in some new way. Look at it as being nature brought up to a different level. There's a snake that can now do things unsnakely, can do things super snakely. All right, look at it as being man who can now do things because he has an intellect, which is comparable, collectively speaking, to civilization, the way I use it. So now you have man is almost a form of a hoop snake, mentally, because he can now do things that are beyond just manly, just beyond homo sapienly then. But look at the hoop snake. What would really, according to this legend, really make it roll and thrive? What would drive that son of a bitch? The sight of its own asshole being repellent. You understand? You have now a constant, forget the U.S. Patent Office and their limited view. You have now the ultimate endless supply of energy, the ultimate perpetual motion machine. That the only way this hoop snake can live as a hoop snake and not just fall back to its common, unspectacular nature, the only way it can operate at this supernatural level is by staying a hoop snake and rolling. And look what makes it roll. It has to hold its own tail. I mean, that's a given to make it a hoop. And it's looking at its own rear end. And what makes it go is it finds, I could have said the smell, but that was a little crude. How about the sight? Either way you want to look at it, the sight of its own ass, it finds repellent. Therefore, it's trying to get away, but it's holding on to it. You understand? You have now, no wonder Exxon and all those big oil cartels and conspiracies trying to stamp out hoop snakes, because there it is, an endless supply of energy. Well, I assume now some of you are getting it. Another version would be that life has put a mirror in everybody's hand implanted, and everybody finds themselves sickening. And you try, but the hoop snake's better. There is civilization. There is the life of man. That in a sense it finds what it does. I point out tonight that life is the one operation beyond any form of criticism. Enough of you have seen that here and there that you realize there is nothing out here. Forget trying to deal with children and the childish attitude of people saying, well, there's hunger in the world and there's injustice, and plus disco may come back. People are sore heads. Beyond all that, there's enough of you that you do know that life is beyond criticism. I mean, you are just confessing how childish you are to criticize life. But life is the only operation beyond criticism, but to man's mind seems to be dependent thereon. That is, to man's mind. Even though they'll stand there and admit, if you said there's nothing in life, speaking in general, you cannot criticize life. And you can get ordinary people in a lucid moment to admit that, just for a second. They may say, well, there's injustice in the world. I might say, all right, there is, but who the hell are you to judge it? You can't criticize it. And for a second, people go, yeah, you're right. And they'll go right back to doing it, because that is part of it. It is a tacit, operational, dynamic to human life, which is intellectual life, civilization, that men find that life, without them analyzing it, that in some way, if you ask them, well, look at the operation. I'll give you the definition. Again, I'll describe it. That if they did not criticize life, it wouldn't keep going. And in a sense, they're right. Except they take it personally. They believe it, like children believe ghosts and fairy tales. Is that men are continually, you and everybody else, the old part of you, is you continue to criticize life. If it's not here, somewhere else. And that helps drive it. That is the hoop snake. That is the side of yourself, in a sense. The side of humanity you find repellent. And you try to get away from it. But you're holding on to your own tail, so what does it do? It makes you roll. You're trying your best to get away, and you can't get away. It's you that annoys you. It's the hoop snake, the side of his own ass, that he finds repellent. And so to get away, he keeps rolling. And he stays in the same position. Except you can't say it rolls and it moves, just like civilization. Does anybody remember, where was the third sidetrack I took? Well, the appearance of what appears to be something new was tied to all that. And I was saying that I was taking that one method, which is sort of up to date. It's of no importance. I'm just using an example because I brought it up to show you, we're back speaking about this kind of activity and how it operates in the tenuous nature thereof inside of everyone. Especially if you're trying to look at it as a holograph sitting out here, that it really exists somewhere, that there's some great school or there's a cave somewhere, there's a secret book. The idea, the method of self-remembering, it is not replacing Catholicism, obviously. Even the National Football League. But amongst people in the West particularly, it has taken on a life of its own. It has rituals. The whole thing is now big enough that there have been factions and schisms, and there's the orthodoxy and the progressive. And they describe it as being indescribable. They describe it, or the man who did it. And here's the point. When people heard it, and I'm sure some of you here, people who will hear this on tape, that some of you, when you first read that, even in a book, struck you, ooh, and they described that a man's walking around sort of in a dream, a low level of consciousness, he could be more conscious, and all that sounds right, yeah. It always has sounded right to certain people, yeah. And it says, all right, here's the way to go about it. The way to work on being more conscious is to keep an awareness which is unnatural. And I'm speaking for the guy, I'm just putting words more or less what he said. And he says, here's what it is. If you try and just hold a constant, objective, non-judgmental, just the awareness that I am here. And he said, I'm going to call it self-remembering. That you remember that I am here regardless of what is running through me. The passions of the moment, the thoughts, the daydreams, whatever it is, I'm going to hold the feeling, the awareness, the remembrance, at least to start with, just here, that I am here. It was very captious, and I said that it was a new telling of something old, but I want you to understand that in no way was any sort of negative reflection on that, because for this to survive, back to when I said there's an adage that says there's nothing new under the sun, and there's also an adage that goes another direction. But for anything to go in civilization, the hoop snake has got to continually, almost every time it rolls around, or every 10 years or so, it has to look up again and be absolutely appalled at its own ass. And you can say, well, hell, you knew that 10 years ago. But he can't, well, think about it. The snake cannot continue like every roll around the circumference. He can't go, well, that did annoy me yesterday, but hey, it's just me. He can't get used to it, in other words. It has to be that periodically he thinks about it, or it's pointed out to him. The subject arises amongst him and other hoop snakes rolling along. It has to be that he does not have a continuing awareness that, hey, that's just me that's annoying me. Or that's just life that I think's annoying me. So, even in civilization, the same kind of thing that fashion. Me laughing, making a little dig at disco, or bell-bottom clothes, disco clothes. If we wait long enough, I shouldn't say it because it'll probably happen if it hadn't already, they'll come back. You can say there is nothing new under the sun. Fashions come and go, haircuts change, women's dresses, the skirts go up this year and they're down, and 2 years later, and you can say, yeah, but what are you going to do? There's just so many so many changes you can make. It has to appear, even with ordinary conditions, just the ordinary circumstances of life, popular music, literature, fashion, everything, it has to appear at least every generation. And sometimes now it's getting faster than a 20-year span or a lifetime span, that there has to appear to be something new and from a certain attitude. It's not criticism, well, we don't care about it, but if you look in a certain way, there's really nothing new in that sense. They can say, this is shocking that dresses are that short. Anybody knows anything about fashion can say, well, hey, 15 years ago, 1492, 1612. Women's dresses were so short that blah, blah, blah. Or that we've never heard music this dissident. Hey, did you ever hear the 1400, I think about the Neo-Renaissance Gregorian Budweiser monks? Wasn't worth the effort. It's simply for you to get the point. You do. Everybody knows this. In one sense, it has no literal bearing, but in one sense, there is nothing new in the civilized world. In the natural world, there's nothing, but in the civilized world, the man's invented, concocted, intellectual world, things that seem new, if you want to take that kind of real hard-nosed critical attitude, you could say, if you knew a little about history, you could say, wait a minute, that's not new. All they've done is change the name. All they've done is put a new bow on it. The main thing to do is to change the name. So I wanted to point out, we've been through several times, I've mentioned it coming and going, they are written records, which I was going into, I pulled one out. When I say written records, it's just, again, to kind of give you what appears to be in the beginning a reasonable diving board upon which to stand so I can try to get everybody jumping and then pull it out from under you, because the written historical evidence, a lot of this I say, well, some of it's so obscure you may not know it. Well, many times when I do that, I just made it up. But it makes you feel better, and it makes you feel like, well, there is some basis for this, because I can say, well, there's certain literature in what we now refer to as the subcontinent that's even pre-Vedic literature. It's before they started putting together the kind of Indian scriptures and philosophy. Anyway, I don't want to bore you with it, but it's older than that. Most people don't know about it. And that sounds good. I could just be making it up. Now I'll go ahead and say wherever I want to. Another side trip right quick, what I was pointing out was referring to historical written evidence to prove a point. That doesn't prove anything. In the civilized world it does, but from our view, from a more alert man's view, somebody has to do that, including you. If I have to do it to you, for you to get your attention, if I say, all right, let me point out there's some historical evidence that I'm going to interpret perhaps a different way, but anyway, there's real evidence to back up what I'm about to say that you can base this on. And if you go, well, I want to hear that. All it's really showing is you hadn't looked in the right place. You have still to look. The evidence is in your nervous system. That's the only reason I can make up stuff, and it doesn't matter. I can say, well, here's the evidence. Or I can misquote it. I can get it backwards, sideways. Who gives a damn? Because the written evidence out here, that is really, that is parole evidence, as the attorneys. That is hearsay. Well, it's third hand. It is not the best evidence. Check with your local magistrate or judge. A good court wants the best evidence. If you go in and you say, well, I have evidence that I paid this bill that the man's suing me for. And the judge says, well, could we see it? He says, well, here's a photograph of my mother holding up a Xerox copy that I made, and she's pointing to it. And a judge is going to say, well, you know, we're not questioning your word yet, sir. We're not saying that you're perjuring yourself, but what this court would like to see is the best evidence. And the best evidence is the original evidence. You understand? Well, even a Xerox copy. I made it a little funny to try to get some of your attention. But if you come and say, well, here's a Xerox copy of the receipt that the guy paid me, then the opposing attorney or the judge is going to say, well, where is the original? He can say, well, this is it. I mean, it's right here. You can see. And it may be a Xerox copy. But the court's still going to say, well, we'd like to see the original. That is the best evidence. And he can say, well, it's just like this. I didn't bring it. Well, go get it. We just want to see the real thing. Okay? That's every other piece of evidence, especially having to do with matters esoteric. To say, well, there's written historical evidence. There may be. There may not be. If there's not, I'll make it up when we need it. But that's not the evidence. That's the second best evidence. That's a photograph of your mother holding up a book that she almost read one time. Any evidence out here is not the best evidence. And if you have to depend on that kind of evidence, if that is what it takes to get your attention, just remember this. You are not, all you're doing is confessing that you have yet to read and investigate the best evidence. And it's in here. That's the only reason I can make it up, and it's right. Or it sounds right. Back to the main track again. There are written records aplenty. I don't even have to make them up. That's been around as long as man has been writing, which he started writing about the mind. That is, spiritual matters, esoteric matters, metaphysical matters, right after he learned to write. started drawing on walls. He drew a naked woman. I'm sure was the first thing. They can't find it yet. They're down to find those stick figures of men in the caves in France, hunting buffalo and stuff, and praying to the sun, which I guess that's pretty old. And they've tried to carbon date, I think, the paint on the wall. But somewhere there's a stick figure of a guy and a woman, doing it. Now, I know men. Don't fool me. Don't try and fool me. But at any rate, well, try and fool me. See if I care. As soon as they got through fooling around with drawing that, they started drawing and writing about matters beyond the physical. I mean, you got to immediately understand that, because that was part of the proof, or that was part of, that coincided, was a manifestation that they were no longer just a physical creature, that they began to do things artistic, that they began to represent what was going on in the mind. And so it was not, they very quickly got over having an interest in just writing or drawing pictures of physical things, like eating, hunting, screwing, sleeping, dying. They just very shortly, that'd take a week or so. And they didn't know why, but then this very thing here, it's like somebody in the penthouse. They worked their way up all these years. They started off as a super down in the basement, worked their way up, saved their money, moved up to the first floor, second floor, finally end up in the penthouse, maybe buy the building. What the hell do they care about down there? They've been there. So very shortly, they no longer, the mind that is represented by literature, art, all the creative areas of human civilization, they very shortly went into matters strictly, so to speak, of the intellectual realm, the metaphysical realm, the spiritual realm, as people used to want to call it. And so one of the first things they wrote about was people understood that the mind here was a very interesting creature. And as soon as people started, before they had degrees in psychology, philosophy, theology, somebody, somewhere, the original prototype of a mystical warrior, some way, fell down, hit his head, had a daydream, was struck by lightning, who the hell knows what, and there he was, conscious, and the inner commentary stopped. And hell, it just started, who knows, 2 weeks before, 10,000 years before, according to how if you're going to look at a man as a man, or just one little slice there on the great DNA train. One of my lines, when I draw my figure, one of those 5 lines up the spine. At any rate, a man had the experience that he was still conscious, and suddenly the mind had stopped. The inner commentary on what he was conscious of stopped. And then as soon as it started back up, he wanted to say something about it. Well, first off, he wanted it back. He wanted it back worse than he wanted a 3D picture of a naked woman instead of those damn stick figures back in the cave. A nice color centerfold. Worse than that, he wanted the experience back. And he understood, or he could remember, what it was like I quit talking. It was like the noise stopped inside, and yet I wasn't unconscious. I wasn't doped up. I wasn't asleep. It wasn't some dream. I was walking around. I knew everything was going on. Boy, did I know everything was going on. How can I get it back? So he's not sure how he got it back, because he didn't know how he even got it. But he knew one thing. He could still remember this, because no one forgets this. It's almost as though inside, has everybody thought, I have even quoted, it's no great secret, but many of the, coming on from the literal, if not allegorical, Far East, all the way from the 1300s, you have the idea of the Zen's trying to describe that the purpose of having the experience, or the experience is, and they would describe it as like being a lake, and then it's always got little ripples, and you sit and you go through this and try to calm it so that finally it is so still that it reflects reality as it is. Beyond that, I was thinking about some of the world's other great unnoted Western philosophers, the Reverend James Cleveland. I guess it's taken from the New Testament, but the idea of Jesus being out and trying to calm, they're out fishing. Anyway, there's this great, people don't recognize a metaphysical hymn, but peace be still. And they sang over and over, peace be still, and it's like Jesus, if I remember, calming the water. And in some way he could take, and all the people were excited, and they're afraid the boats were going to sink, and they'd lose their catch, lose their lives. And through his power, it stopped the storm. Oh, that sounds great if you're a child. Like, boy, wouldn't that be great? That if I trust in God and I stick with being a Southern Baptist or a Methodist or a Christian, that I can someday call upon God. Well, I do all the time, but maybe one day he'll actually answer and save me from a storm. I mean, that's nice. That's nice. That's a nice dream. And ordinary people are desperate, and children that worry about booger bears under the bed. But think about what it is. Peace be still. Screw the idea about fishing and a storm. If you think somebody can stop a storm, you go find them and take them out in a storm. Be sure and call me. Well, not me. I've seen it, but I got a cousin, Elmo. Call him, because he never saw anybody get run over by a storm. I mean, they just stand there. Point is, I've written a few lately about believing that in some way, if you're going to be in a battle between you and a hurricane or any natural force, you don't have to show up. Especially don't pay money for tickets to that kind of bout. Appearing today, Reverend so-and-so or Yogi so-and-so or Guru so-and-so versus an eruption, a volcano. Don't pay money. Trust me. At any rate, that kind of story just is back to show that there is nothing new. Again, that was sort of a sidetrack, but some of you may know it. It's some line from the New Testament, I'm sure. But it's now a hymn that's spread all over Western Christianity. But I know it's some line, and I know this, most of you, I guess, remember the story, some kind of storm. And here it is, this mythical figure, this superhero, but a mythical figure, literally stops the storm. Peace be still. Stops the storm. The waves calm down, and everyone's life saved. To a real mystical person, that's dreams. I mean, you could say, well, that's nice. I wish I had that power, maybe, in case I'm ever out fishing and, it's a great storm. But that's nothing. All that's talking about is life and death. No, that's nothing. What it is, to somebody who understands this kind of repetitious literature, someone who sees for themselves, they have to renew constantly in your own generation. You have to renew your own interpretation of it. That's what I'm getting to in a minute. You understand, boy, I'm not interested in some kind of power, especially somebody else doing it. You don't even care anymore. You don't have to read the history. You don't care. It's not a matter whether somebody named Jesus existed or a Buddha. That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether anybody did that. What if they did? So what? That's not what interests a real person. What interests them is, the point is, there's more record of what they're, there was another man that wasn't some external figure, unless you're back to the fairy tale interpretation. Saying, peace be still on a storm. It was him saying to himself, shh. Last time I said that I was closing out that the night's secret mantra may turn out to be not some mantra, not some plea directed to an external deity, but to himself of, shut up. And I was going to finally say, if any of you found that a little too, rough, and I said it, you don't have to do a loud version that didn't have an explanation point at the end of it when I wrote it. But you can just say, shh. Or, would you be quiet? Of course, there's a better way than that we'll finally get to, but it's shh. Peace be still. Back to the idea of self-remembering and there being nothing new in a sense. If you're following any of this. Let's start off, let me make it real simple or crude. I could say there is nothing new under the sun. And if we were ordinary people and I was doing some sort of critique of matters mystical, and me saying, boy, I have all this crap about religion and people trying to have some metaphysical experience. What a bunch of stuff. Because then, right now, there's some group, and I could point out one. I could use this example. Now, so there's a bunch of people now, they're spending their time together and working and contributing money and God doing what all, and they believe their whole point is that they're attempting, now listen to this, they're trying to, quote, remember themselves constantly. And I can say, I understand what they're doing, and they think it's some kind of new deal, and they got a guy's picture that was come over here from some other country 50 years ago. They got his photograph up there, and they trying to, fighting over what exactly he said, how he exactly described it. I understand what it is, and it could be used, but for them to think that's something new, Jesus Christ, and then start pointing out, here is written records, over 5,000 years ago of that same thing. They just didn't call it that. Yeah. But that's no good. It's not plagiarism, and it is not worthy of criticism. It has to be plagiarized. It has to be renamed, even in matters verging on the non-routine. That is, of matters of people who would try and have that experience. Now, there were several tonight that said a night secret strategy. If you're going out to kill a dragon, kill 2 at a time, which is a lot more. Maybe we'll spend a year on that someday. And there was another one that said there were 2 ways you could go about it. It wasn't connected to that as far as you knew, but now you see. It said there are 2 ways to go about this certain thing. If you're a knight going out on an outbound night, a knight going out a-nighting. There are 2 ways to go about it. You can starve a dragon to death or feed it till it bursts. If you do not rename something to yourself, if it is not renamed to you to start with, you have already started off at a disadvantage. Not that you're not at a disadvantage depending on where to start with, but that's where everybody starts anyway. It's like even to get to the starting line, you find out that they've already had a truck pull there. Bigfoot was there and they had some kind of exhibition of motocross and guys named Bubba in pickup trucks. That's the best starting line. That's the minimal. But there's a worse one. And that is when you take the past versions of the starting line as being literal truth. To wit. I was hoping you'd get there. To wit. Now I'm just using literal examples. Again, you got to look at it as being a tangible springboard, diving board to get up on it. But once you start, bouncing, give up the board. The examples are of no importance, but you got to start. If we're going to use words, they got to be put in. That seem to make some sort of sense, or else they have some gibberish. Let me take this kind of example of the attempt, in a sense, to establish a quiet monastery while one is peripatetic, while one is in civilization. This idea that I'm going to remember myself. Then if we said, all right, here it is, 5,627 years ago, and here is the evidence I'm not making up. Here it is, the written evidence that a guy, a school based on some guy, said that, I'm just going to make this up, but it's somewhere close, that to see reality, one must hold still within one's mind reality. I just made that up. But I could take that and say, now do you hear? What they're saying is the same thing. And if that's a little vague, I did it purposely vague and just made it up, we could move up 1,000 years. And I say, now here's one I'm sure you've heard, slightly different part of the world, same people, same kind of interest, and they're saying the way to awaken, the way to the experience is to continually, with every breath, remember one of the names of God. And everybody that's read anything has read something similar to that. So I could say, that's the same thing that the one I told you had never heard of. Even before that one, 1,000 years before, it's the same thing. Now all that is, if you follow that, all that is now saying, circa in the 20th century, all that is the same method of a person trying to continually self-remember. That now it sounds less theological, less spiritual, it sounds more psychological. Anyway, it sounds new. And I can say it's the same thing. You are at a disadvantage if you're dependent upon the original. If I said, all right, now, I'm here to start a mystical school of some kind. We're trying to, anybody that really wants that kind of historic experience, and we know it happens because here's the literature right before your eyes. I've heard that somewhere. But now I'm going to tell you, we're going to we've got to get back to the source. I know that there are people now, maybe some of you came from some of these would-be street corner mystical schools, that one of the more popular is right now is people trying to self-remember. How many people have got involved with that? And a bunch of you raise your hand. That's right. Probably no harm done yet. Glad you got here in time. Glad you found me in time. But now here's the thing. That is simply it's a new, they've got it all tangled up. I mean, they got all confused. Are you with me? And you all agree. All right. So watch this. And I pull out some literature, or say I have it, or I've seen it, that here is the original. Simply the point, we got to go back to the original. It's like the orthodoxy of mysticism. The orthodoxy of the ultimately unorthodox. We got to get back to the original. Now this is true, this is true out in civilization in a certain way. It's true in religion, it's true in art, that is not what drives. Remember, that's not what drives the hoop snakes. The ones that roll and thrive get past that. But you do know in general there is always a continuing, it's like a movement along the sidelines of a ball game, like a football game. Of course, remember the civilized football game, there is no end zone. I mean, so don't worry about 50-yard line, 20-yard line, because it's going and there is no goalpost. I mean, you keep thinking there is, but you don't ever get there as a point. But all the way along the sideline is this kind of moving commentary of some segment of society which is necessary, hollering, no, you guys are going too fast. I mean, you've got on the wrong uniforms. Oh, you people, look at the players out there, the way they're dressed. We need to go back the way our forefathers meant it. We need to go back when they played the game correctly. It is also true that will have and does have a certain kind of built-in, because it has to do with genetics, not psychology, that there's a built-in reaction, positive reaction to having someone point out in things mystical. To say, this idea, for instance, that we should try and be remembering ourselves impartial at all times, that's got all New Age, they got all screwed up here, bringing it into the Western world. We got to go back to the origins. It has a built-in, many people, it's just the way life is, that will go, yes. That is a supreme disadvantage. See, that's not even up to the muddied starting line. To believe that you've got to go back there. And of course, all this is allegorical. That is religion at its most fundamental. That is taking fairy tales, allegories, myths, legends, history even, but especially the first named, of taking them as being literal fact. That you can be 70 years old, you can have 3 PhDs, and you can now say that you're trying to live a life of a monk, that you're going off and retire and study the great words of great teachers. And if you take any of that literally, you may be 70 years old with 3 degrees. But you've got the understanding of a child, 6, 7 years old, just barely literate. That you take these stories like, well, there was a figure that calmed storms. There's somebody who died and was resurrected, came back to life. If you take that literally, you got the mind of a child. Very common, but that is the position you're in to believe. You follow all this? Now remember, I started off saying we could make I'm playing a fictitious part of a guy who is criticizing the contemporary method of attempting to in some way do something extraordinary with one's consciousness by a continual, objective, impartial remembering of oneself, that I'm just simply here, and I won't forget that, no matter what else happened. Then I was playing the part of someone criticizing that and saying, they've got it all muddied up. They got too many flowers on it, they've repainted it too many times. We got to go back to the origins. And if I could playing the part again, if I could get some people to do it, which it happens, to go back to the origins, and they had any potential to begin with of actually ever doing this, they are at a worse disadvantage than they were to start with. But you understand that there are many people, you should be able to feel this. Now, all of you can feel it if you're in a lucid moment yourself or you don't belong here, that there is an immediate attraction to that. To say, wait a minute, some of us are on the right, some of you are on the right track in some of these books, and I'm going to quote other people, and I'm going to use some of these other examples, but they have it's too modern, they've just screwed it up, there's too many opinions have gone into it over the last 5,000 years, too many people's added this and that, and it's become just an unsavory gumbo. A potpourri that is no longer fit to smell. We have got to go back to the origins. And your nervous system, many people will just positively vibrate. I knew it. To themselves they think, I knew it. I knew that. I knew it. We've got to go back when things were pure and simple. By the way, read childlike. Simplistic. there is no way to go back, but I wanted you to follow. I could, if I playing this part, I could pick on whatever it was, self-remembering. I'm just using that since I already brought it up last time. And say, we have got to go back. There's validity to it, but screw all this stuff the way they're describing it now. What we've got to do is remember the name of God with every breath. Or remember every breath. I'll even take God out. Got to remember every breath. That is, be conscious. Like being just conscious in a kind of a positive, thankful way of every time you breathe. And I say, here it is. It was written 5,000 years before the first Hindu scripture was ever put to paper. I saw it. I saw it written down on this papyrus somewhere that I've been. And there it is. That what you're doing is you have, instead of living a life distracted here and there, here was the original method. Here was the first man who ever did on this planet. It was right after Adam. I could give a whole story and say this was the original, the first man. And he said, here is the method. He was the first man. He was the father of all mystical experience, the father of all stages of higher consciousness and awakening. And he said this. I was there. I have seen it. A few people on this planet at any given time have access to it. He said, remember and be aware of every breath you take. And now I could go from there and say, think about that. There is no theology, there is no belief, there is nothing to look for. It is simply, amidst you living out your 60 years here, no matter what else happens, you live, you die, you sleep, you screw, you lose your lover, you lose a child, you have children, you have some success, you have failure. No matter what happens, all you do is be aware, because you're not. Just be aware of every breath. It doesn't matter if you're driving, if you're asleep, almost, walking. It's simply be aware of each breath. That was the origin. The rest of this is all superfluous, misdirected add-ons. That is the original. If I got someone playing this fictitious part, if I got people to go, okay, you're right. The origin is always the best. The paradigm, the original model, the first teaching of it, the first map of it. And it sounds almost unassailable. Well, I'm not sure where it all leads to, but you're right. If there is an origin if there is the original model of any practice to lead one toward that experience, then the original has got to be the best. That's mystical talk for... That's mystical talk for your mother looks like Jackie Mason. All right, now we got that far. I'm assuming because tape's running out, so I'll go ahead and just state it as a given. Well, we've gotten that far. In spite of that, ergo, withal, on the other hand, thus, onward, in spite of that, each person, first off, each generation, I already tried to get you to see that, it just happens, each generation must, and it may be no more from one view than a renaming, which don't stop there and criticize, or you're just a kid sticking out your tongue like, you people don't fool me, all you do is rename it something else. You can do that, but don't stick out too far, or civilization will run right over your tongue. All those people on the field, your tongue is going, it's going to have the badge. All right, besides the general movement and the renaming, even if what I pointed out had real validity, and you really felt it though it did, that we have to go back to the origins. We can't just keep renaming stuff. In no sense saying, well, nowadays what we should do is be involved with the practice of blah, 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 self-remembering. And we say, nah, it's the origins. That's nothing new. Here it is 6,000 years ago, and here's what it was originally called, and that's what we should be calling it. You go, God, I'm delighted. Now we're getting somewhere. No. We're not getting anywhere. You're having, instead of nightmares, you're having dreams of history, as though history existed. What you have got to do, even individually, is you do, in spite of this, in spite of what I said, of course I've been doing it for you, and I continue to do it, but you have got to rename it and reinvent yourself, or it's not worth duck to. You understand? In spite of me pointing out that what mechanically rolls by, and it's simply the hoop snake, every so often, finding the sight and smell of its own ass repellent and drives it on. The game continues to go, and in a sense, there is nothing new out there. They keep renaming it. Wait a minute. Instead of the Statue of Liberty play, let's do the somnambulistic tango dancer. And you see the play and you think, what is this? And they said, that's that new play that the Cowboys came up with. They call it the somnambulistic tango dancer. You see when the quarterback does that and you go, ah, shit, they ain't nothing but the old Statue of Liberty play. Boy, you behind the times. You understand? And you could say, no, I'm ahead of the times because they're not fooling me. Wrong, you're behind the times. No, I'm ahead of the times, see, because that's old. I mean, the Statue of Liberty play's been around for years. What's wrong with you people here? I thought you knew something about sports. That's the same thing. All he done is rename it. I'm too smart for that. No, you're too dumb for that. If you're ordinary, I was afraid of that, but thankfully the tape's toward an end. Individually, in spite of all that, which I can make it sound positive, and etc. In spite of that, individually, you must rename it. You must apparently rediscover it. To take this example, the method of this kind of stilling of consciousness, the stilling of the mind. And now it's being called, or one of the versions being called, self-remembering. And we say, all right, it used to be that, and it was this, and it was this, and I can trace it, and here it is, and now it's just this, but it's still that. And if you get that, go, all right, you got to rename it past self-remembering. If you want the real better description, you have to rediscover it. It's already there. I've already told you what it is. But in a sense, you have to rename it. You understand? In spite of it feeling like, well, there would be advantage to going back and get to the original instead of fooling around with these things that they just added new descriptions. And, who are they trying to fool? It's the same thing. No, you missed it. I mean, it may be true, since I'm the one that told you. Yeah, it may be true. But it's not a matter of going back. It's not a matter of sitting here criticizing, well, they did rename it. Fine. Now you do it. If you don't, should we have a show of hands of who all's glad that the tape ran out? Watch it.